Good evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome to this evening's Australian Fabians event, analysis of the 2019 federal election. First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners, elders past, present and emerging. My name is Daniel Smith. I'm Executive Director and Founder of CGM Communications. It's my great honour to be the sponsor tonight, but also the MC. So I'll make a few remarks at the start and introduce our speakers and then facilitate a Q&A. So start thinking about your questions. Thanks to Australian Fabians here in WA. Thanks for tonight's event, but also for all the events and work you do in having conversations, helping us have conversations about the things that matter. If you're interested in joining Australian Fabians, Rob Knox, convener here in WA, please see Rob. Also Phil O'Donoghue and Sarah Munn. Please approach them. They'd love to have you on board. A little bit of housekeeping before we get down to business. Can you please put your phones on silent? Everybody reaches for their bags and pockets. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please change leader, conduct a review and come up with a new slogan. Too soon? Sorry. Seriously, note the exits and follow instructions from the manager, Scott. The drink service from the bar will remain open throughout the event this evening, so please feel free to jump up and grab yourself a refreshment. There'll be hot food. Like I said, it's already almost finished. Yes, please jump in, pass it around as well so everybody can share in. As I said, following our presentations, there'll be time for a Q&A. We'll sit out here, we'll have a microphone. Please think of some questions. Please keep your comments and your questions brief so we can give as many people an opportunity as possible to get in. So, another shock election result. Or was it? I can see by tonight's turnout, we've already a lot of people here looking for answers, with questions, probably some opinions, probably all of the above. Is the result most like 2004? Is it like 1993? Or is it like 1963? I hope not. Was the polling really that wrong? Should we really be surprised that people are worried about the economy and jobs? And why is the quantitative research getting such a hard time? What about the qualitative work? What did it miss? To ponder these and many other questions, we're joined by two first-rate political analysts. They're hiding behind me, but the first one is Karen Luscombe, second William Bowe. Karen is Principal Researcher for WA Opinion Polls, which for more than 25 years has conducted focus groups and polling research here in WA and federal politics for the AOP. She and Jim Lamev, also at WAOP, conducted focus groups and polling work across the country for the AOP for the 1993 federal election, the John Hewson GST True Believers election, which is one of the elections that this election's result has been compared with. William Bowe is an electoral analyst for Crikey and a regular participant in federal and state election-like coverage for ABC Radio. He's been the publisher of the blog The Poll Bludger for more than 10 years, providing commentary on election campaigns, opinion polls and voting behaviour. So we've got an excellent panel. I'm going to invite Karen to give her presentation first, followed by William, and then we'll be back for some Q&A. Please welcome Karen.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I have to largely read this because I'm not allowed to go over time. There have been many articles written about this election, and there have been a lot of very excellent analysis done, and I really commend people to have a look at that particular material that's coming out recently in The Guardian, The Conversation, and of course on the ABC. We did the research for Federal Labor in 1990 and 1993. We were young, and we put off having a family until after the 1993 election. Some important points to make from 1990 and 93 elections. In 90 and 93, Labor had very regional battles. We focused on what was happening in marginal seats in each state. That was the work that was done. The overall analysis in published polls really was not seen as particularly pertinent. So the average across the country was not important. It was what was happening in Western Australia, what was happening in Victoria, what was happening in Queensland, and so forth. There were major problems in Victoria and Western Australia. In 90 in particular was an election where the result in WA made the difference, and the eyes of the nation really did turn west once the polls closed here to find out what was going to happen on that occasion. 93 was much harder. The very important lesson in '93 was the emerging volatility, where we saw more voters moving their votes than had ever been seen before. Traditional allegiances were breaking down, and there were increasing numbers of soft voters, due in large part to the challenges being faced by people affected by the changing economy. The history of tariff reductions and deregulations causing a lot of people to be adrift, causing a lot of blue-collar workers a lot of grief at that time. There were very big swings against Labor leading into the '93 campaign, and it was a painstaking task to find the narrow path to victory on that occasion. But it involved listening to a lot of rage and finding the issues that Labor could craft strong messages on. It particularly involved keeping the focus of attention on the Liberals' policy plans that included not just the GST, which everybody has talked about since, but removal of bulk billing in Medicare for most people, individual work contracts in industrial relations, and basic changes in the welfare system. So there were a lot of fundamental shifts proposed there. And we wanted people to be looking at those and not at the anger people felt towards Labor over so many things. The expectations of who would win were leading people to focus on one side or the other. So that was an extremely important conversation, and I don't know why people have forgotten the dangers that lie in being seen as the comfortable winner in any election and all the problems that flow from that, even in one's own campaign. Coming out of the '93 election, a lot of people in the Labor Party took the view that the following election would be easier to win. We voiced a contrary view that many of the issues would be gone, such as the GST and the threat to Medicare, and there was an increasing problem connecting and communicating with blue-collar workers and others who were being severely affected by all the economic changes that were going on. People didn't understand the growing volatility in the Australian community, that people changed their votes, often at the last minute, and were becoming increasingly willing to do so. The role of good research is to listen to people and to understand the issues that are important to them, how they're responding to the policies and issues of the times, how they're likely to respond in the future based on the problems they're facing, and how to connect and communicate with them. Inherently not so much to predict results as to change them. The task for a campaign is to build the narratives and the arguments over a long period of time and to bring all that together at the end in a clear and powerful campaign that emphasises strong points of difference, i.e. why the others are the wrong choice, and what your plan for the future is. Coming close last time doesn't mean anything. It's a changed landscape and the issues have taken a different shape in between. So, research we've done in WA this year has a fair bit to say about what occurred here, and so my comments now are very focused mostly on how people feel in WA. I'm sure there were different issues elsewhere, and I touch on those where I can. We were finding through all our research that people feel very strongly here that many people in WA are doing it tough, households are struggling, cost of living is high, people's wages and incomes have not kept pace, and I think that word incomes is important as well as the word wages. There is a lot of unemployment and there's a lot of underemployment. Unemployment among young people is high, graduates are not getting jobs in their fields. There's negative equity with people in places like Ellenbrook owing more on their houses than what they are worth. Very importantly, incomes have reduced and are insecure. Many people are dependent on short-term contracts, casual positions, part-time jobs, or having to work as contractors and small business people. So the main issues people were concerned about were these, and these are compiled from a number of sources: jobs for young people, insecurity of incomes, reduced incomes, the cost of living, and pressure on household finances, and that, is a constellation of issues that all fit together. Also, health and education. Those were very major issues of concern for people at the start of this year. Also, climate change is emerging much more strongly than in previous years, even though there hasn't been a strong discussion about that in WA. people are very concerned from all the other media that they read. Also, aged care, improving the economy, border security and reducing immigration, and particular issues in health such as mental health in particular. What we found in our research was that there were people swinging away from the Liberals, but there were also people swinging away from Labor for a range of reasons. And this was clearly giving the Liberals many opportunities to develop vote-shifting arguments. We couldn't see evidence that people had a clear view of the reasons to vote Labor rather than Liberal this time round, remembering that soft voters need to be convinced to vote for you all over again each time. There was really only one issue moving votes towards Labor, and that was the dumping of Malcolm Turnbull. There wasn't much going on about those issues there that are up on the screen, so not a lot of that was translating into anger towards this federal government because the narrative just didn't appear to be there. Meanwhile, there were people moving away from Labor on a range of issues, including the feeling that Bill Shorten doesn't have what it takes and was talking about the wrong issues. In a survey that we ran in mid-March across Haslark, Swan, Pearce, Cowan and Perth, so we used a basket of those seats, more than 600 interviews across the lot. There were a lot of soft voters still open to be convinced at that point, but 46% of soft voters cited the economy and jobs as the most important issue in deciding who to vote for out of the 4 choices that we gave them. So it was a limited range of choices, but they were the economy and jobs, health and education, fairer taxes and border security, because we felt a lot of the arguments were centred on those issues. Soft voters were experiencing job insecurity and not having enough hours of work. Half of the soft voters who were working were not confident of having their current job in a year's time, and half said they would like more hours. So we've got areas, particularly areas like Haslark, areas of Pearce, and even the top part of Swan are areas where all of these issues are going to be very important. Daniel's comment about that particular work was that the party that sold itself best on job creation was likely to win the election, and clear communication on how you will roll up your sleeves and create jobs, laying out a vision for jobs going forward, was key. The federal budget was delivered on April 2nd with a strong message framed on financial management and the economy, with the very misleading anthem "Back in Black" and "Australia is back on track," trying to set, I think, a benchmark on economic management, linking economic management to financial management, which is a fallacious one we can discuss later. Supposedly putting more money back in people's pockets, targeting people's concerns that they don't have enough cash, and a range of other issues. Then we had 2 weeks of unanswered advertising on Labor's proposed tax changes impacting on people on issues like house prices and rents. And the Bill Shorten equals tax, debt and a weakened economy argument. So, this was the billboard, and the television advertisements were saying much the same thing, with these sorts of pictures that people would remember seeing. It was a strong campaign. It had the impact of people highlighted. It wasn't just the issues. They were trying to show what effect that would have on people going forward. So, after that period, we did another survey, a repeat of the one we had done in March in the same electorates, with some slightly different questions. We collected it at the end of April, 3 weeks before the election, and at the end of that 2-week period after the budget that I've just talked about. There were a lot of votes moving in both directions, but unfortunately the swing away from Labor was now larger than the swing to Labor, particularly now in Haslark and Pearce. And in that survey, although we didn't do enough to have clear vote, seat-by-seat figures. There was particularly a shift noticeable in Hasluck, and Pearce was worse. Pearce wasn't that great in the first one. More than 15% in the survey were changing their effective two-party preferred vote. Now that is a very important thing to realise. If you look at the overall results of the election, it looks like not much happened. There were small swings one way or the other across a lot of seats. But underneath that, there were big movements between the major parties. Labor won a lot of votes, but Liberals also won a lot of votes. So there were a lot of people watching and changing their minds. Looking at the answers to some of their other questions, 64% of those swinging away from Labor cited the economy and jobs as the most important issue determining their vote of the four we tested. So that was an increase, and obviously it was an increase in importance of that issue for everyone, and also it was particularly biting for the people who were swinging away from Labor. These additional swings were among young people and the middle age group at this time. So they were responding perhaps to the tax messages and the impact on house prices and the economy, which many people with insecure incomes feel dependent upon. While the main issues for those moving to Labor were health and education and fairer taxes, again of the four that we tested, so climate change was not in that basket. Among soft voters, the Liberals were seen as having a better plan on jobs, and the Liberals had the lead on having the better plan on tax. This was extremely troubling data, obviously, and Labor was going to be playing catch-up in WA after that. I was waiting for a hard-hitting Labor campaign with a strong vision. I was concerned that they'd left their run too late. In the event, that's not what we got. So I think a lot of people feel that it was a poor advertising campaign. The advertising campaign is the one place where you can control the message and get cut through. It's the opportunity to counterbalance a hostile media and even to get the message through when it's not being communicated clearly in other places. Labor's advertising and messaging appeared to be based on things that were relevant 6 months ago, but not now. Labor's advertising campaign has been described as complacent and unfocused and failing to exploit the coalition's weaknesses. Now, the ads must target issues that concern people and the effect it will have on them in the future in a way that connects with soft voters in marginal seats, not people who follow politics closely all the time. It's not about political point scoring, it has to be about the things that are important to people. Labor's plans in health and education needed to be framed against the history of cuts under the Liberals. People no longer had a clear understanding of those, and because most recent political history had been too confused. The teachers' campaign was helpful, but more was needed. The point about the terrible disunity and dysfunction in the Liberal Party is that they've been asleep at the wheel on so many issues that are affecting the standard of living for people in marginal seats. Developing the jobs of the future, addressing insecure work, underemployment and incomes, and the higher cost of living, as well as climate change. So that was what we needed to hear. It wasn't there. Labor also had good policies that were announced too late, not explained clearly. A lot of people wouldn't have heard them. Bill Shorten's image and capacity to communicate the message were problems that the Liberals exploited. It said that he was not liked and not trusted, and that Bill Shorten's public appearances have been described as wooden and unrelatable. For electors in WA, the material that we were hearing, he appeared to be very carefully repeating something he memorised earlier without the right inflection in his speech, and therefore without communicating genuineness, conviction and capability. The key point is that he was not able to communicate Labor's messages. He was not able to convince people that he knew what he was doing and was up to the job. So people said things like, I'm pro-Labor, but I'm not sure he's up to the job of Prime Minister. A lot of people said to us, I don't have confidence in either of them, and the Liberals did a better job of convincing people to have more confidence in Scott Morrison. I thought the debates were much better, and he was appearing to speak in a connected way a much higher proportion of the time. But it was too little, too late, and not enough of the right people were listening. Scott Morrison's performance and image were tightly managed for the messages they wanted to convey, namely his rock-solid confidence that he was about supporting a stronger economy, to look after people's jobs and their future prosperity, support small business and give people back more money. It appears that Scott Morrison was able to connect with electors in Queensland and regional areas more effectively than even Malcolm Turnbull did previously. In the final days, Bob Hawke's passing afforded Scott Morrison the opportunity to look and sound more prime ministerial and more connected than Bill Shorten, and without the smugness that is a significant weakness for Morrison. So pulling it all together, it's about understanding core values and what they mean in the context of the problems of modern Australia, developing core points of difference, developing a narrative over an extended period of time, listening to people, understanding the problems that are facing people, understanding how policies are going to interact with the narratives that people have, connecting in a cohesive way with those concerns with clear messages so that the campaign messages resonate with where people are at, and running local campaigns off a strong umbrella of core messages. I saw strong local campaigns this time with good candidates and local information on education and health, and this can be very effective, but it needs to have that strong umbrella of core messages from the central campaign to support them. On the positive side, understanding the volatility and the importance of narratives and values built up over time, we need to understand that this situation is not set in stone at all. There is a capacity to engage people in Queensland, the most decentralised state, and people in the outer suburbs of WA. This is not anything as simple as coal versus the environment. It has a lot to do with who cares about us, jobs, the cost of living, and the elements that underpin the well-being of people who don't have high incomes in each of those regions in our modern economy. Pulling the threads together and explaining it to people clearly that demonstrate that you actually understand and that you are on the ball and can take action to address both pressing current and long-term problems. Labor had a good story on jobs. They didn't pull it all together and put it out clearly. There was infrastructure spending, health and education, which are big areas of employment that people see as very important. They had a small business initiative and whatever it was, they were going to do about 457 visas and more. They had a lot of good policies, but they were not communicated in a way that connected well enough with working people in marginal seats. The latest themes that were put forward and the people working hard in those local campaigns did win a lot of votes. That is clear from the polling that we did. But in key marginal seats, the Liberals won more. People are prepared to listen. They are craving answers to many of the long-term problems that are underpinning their futures where they live, including the future of work and incomes in this country. And they are also supporting strong public services that underpin well-being and opportunity, and addressing climate change. Of course, none of that's simple, but there is a lot of opportunity there for progressive politics.
Thank you, Karen. Look, I've already outlined William's credentials, so I'll just briefly welcome him to the voting.
Seconds or so fumbling around trying to get my PowerPoint happening. Are you going to work? Are you going to work? Maybe you. Yeah. All right.
Right in the middle.
Are you going to work? And number 11 from memory. How do I get the
On the top slideshow.
slideshow? Oh dear, what about that? The top slideshow. There you go.
From beginning.
From beginning. All right. the hard bit out of the way. Now the easy bit, explaining why the election went well. In reality, I've got no more of an idea than anybody else here, but what I like to say is that I'm more nuanced in my miscomprehension than everybody else. I don't conduct actual survey research. I just, I think Karen and me together are a kind of good combination in that she does micro and I do macro. I'm going to look at the result at the national level and try and pick out patterns within it and read the minds that very strange and peculiar place that is the Australian electorate, with which we are today more confused than we would have been before. So let's start with the obvious numbers of what is on the national scoreboard. Labor got 33.34% of the primary vote. The best thing you can say about that is that it is exactly 1/3, so it's easy to pass. In every other respect, though, it's a terrible result. It shaded the previous worst result in Labor's history, as far as I'm concerned, which was 2013, which was 33.38%. So not much in it, but if we're going for that title, there it is. In 1903, Labor got a lower share of the vote. That was the last time that happened, and back then Labor were only contesting a couple of seats. So for as long as Labor has been a mass party, their primary vote has never been lower. However, Coalition also had an historically bad result if you're going to look at the primary vote. At all the various manifestations of the Coalition parties together, Liberal, National, Country, Liberal, National, and it's getting ever more complex. Add them all together, you get 41.44% of the vote. The only time the Coalition has done worse than that on the primary vote in modern history was in 1998. To win in 1998 as well. On that occasion, One Nation were a factor, as indeed they were this time. So, when they've got One Nation gouging a big chunk out of their vote, their primary vote can fall quite low. And I guess there is a parallel there with the fact that Labor's primary vote is as low as it is because they've got the Greens competing with them on the left. So I suppose the lesson to be drawn from that is that we now have an environment where both the major parties have predators on their side of the spectrum gouging a chunk out of their primary votes. Now, the Greens got 10.23% of the vote. If you look at that superficially, that compares with 10.40% of the primary vote. And I think a lot of people did look at that superficially and concluded that maybe the Greens didn't have that brilliant a result. But I think the Greens had a very good result, and rather a better result than I expected. The reason that primary vote figure doesn't look too remarkable is that they simply face more competition this time. Not everyone who votes for the Greens is a left-wing zealot. Some of them are just generally apathetic people, disengaged from the political process, looking for a target of opportunity for their protest vote against the two-party hegemony. The more competition there is from minor parties, the more difficult it is for them to get a big critical mass and get a big primary vote. So that doesn't matter whether the competition they get from the left or the right, that can be a big bearing on how big their primary vote is. I think you can get a better sense of how well the Greens did by looking at their Senate vote, where they always have a lot of competition from lots of different minor parties, and on this occasion their Senate vote increased quite emphatically from 8.65% to 10.20%. It was the Greens' best result with the exception of 2010, and in 2010 they had the once-in-a-lifetime free kick of the deposition of Kevin Rudd. That sent a huge infusion of a Labor protest vote to the Greens, and I think misled a lot of people into thinking that the Greens were on this permanent upward trajectory. I don't think that's the case. I think that the Greens probably do have a bit of a ceiling, but they're going to have some elections that are going to be better than others. Given that all that they went through in the past 3 years, I think the Greens will probably bracing for a worse result than they've got. For the time being, I'm just focusing on vote shares. I'll look at seats in a minute, and that's an even better story for the Greens. One Nation got 3.08% of the vote compared to what they achieved in 1998. That's not sensational, but we go back to the question of how much competition you've got. Furthermore, you go to the question of how many candidates they field. One Nation don't like fielding candidates in every seat. I guess they've been stung by the fact that the more candidates they've got, the more trouble emerges with the problematic history that seemingly everyone who has anything to do with One Nation has. The more negative headlines, the more controversies, the more noise, and you can see what's doing like that in any election campaign. One Nation candidates will end up having stimulating and interesting backgrounds. They went from 15 candidates to 59 candidates though. That's a much bigger share than last time, and that's the reason the One Nation primary vote share goes from 1.29% to 3.08%. They simply had more candidates. The 15 candidates they ran last time, they tended to concentrate on their best seats. Here they were casting their net wider, so their average vote per electorate, they ran was lower, but you'd expect that because it was less colonially centric and they were running more candidates in different places around the country. One person who didn't care about the background of his candidates was Clive Palmer. He ran candidates in every single electorate, all 151 of them, and yes, I saw billboards for some of his candidates from obviously very obscure people you've never heard of before or since, and he felt that worth his while, but who knows what goes on in that mind of his. He got 3.43% of the national vote. Now, lest we think that voters are completely, Pavlovian in their response to election advertising, this was substantially lower than in 2013. So Clive Palmer's image was not as good in 2019 as it was in 2013. That did make a difference, and famously his $60 million advertising campaign did not yield him a single seat. What it did, however, was damage Labor. It damaged Labor in multiple ways, and again, I think I'll save the punchline for the next slide because got another thing here looking specifically at the two-party vote. Okay, so that's the big picture in relation to the primary vote. We do not know yet what the national two-party preferred vote is because there are about 13 seats where they haven't been doing coalition versus Labor counts because the last two candidates in the count from the minor party are independent candidates. The AEC will get around to counting that eventually, and we will have a concrete idea of, the national two-party preferred vote, i.e. what percentage of the population put the coalition ahead of Labor or vice versa. It looks like it's going to be about 52% for the coalition. In 2016, it was 50.4%. So we seem to have had a 1.6% swing in two-party preferred terms to the coalition. What I have in my table here is a comparison of where these two-party preferred totals came from. I've got for both major parties at both of the last two elections their primary vote and how much. These are, as I said, we don't have the full results yet, so 2019, these are sort of back on the way estimates. But I assume the Greens' preference flow would have been very similar in 2016 and 2019. What changed though was that row there, others. How all non-Greens minor parties plus independents, whack them all together, how many of those preferences flow to the coalition, how many flow to Labor. In 2016, it was almost exactly even. In 2019, it wasn't. There was a substantial lean towards the coalition in non-Greens minor party and independent preferences, and that, as you see, 8.6% of the vote ends up with the coalition, 6.3% ends up with Labor. That is over half of that 1.6% two-party preferred swing right there. Primary votes made a smaller contribution. The Labor vote fell from 34.7 to 30.3.3. That's a bigger fall than 42 to 41.4 for the coalition. So that's an incremental factor there. But most of the difference was the fact that that big share of minor party and independent votes flowed more strongly to the coalition this time. Part of that is because we have a bigger One Nation share of the vote, and One Nation preferences lean somewhat more to the coalition to Labor. Nothing like as strongly as Green preferences flow to Labor, but nonetheless there is a lean in the One Nation preference flow to the coalition. More to the point, equally to the point probably, the United Australia Party, Clive Palmer's preferences very solidly flow to the coalition ahead of Labor. Now, you might think that this stands to reason given that he had that celebrated preference deal. I am sceptical about how much of a difference that made. Parties like Clive Palmer's party, their how-to-vote cards don't make a huge amount of difference. They do not have a massive volunteers to put those how-to-vote cards into people's hands at polling booths. People are going into the polling booth to make up their mind. I have nothing to back this up, but my impression is that Clive Palmer's impact on the election was more to sort of poison the Labor well. to the kind of people who were receptive to the Clive Palmer message, spent the advertising campaign absorbing his anti-Labor, anti-Bill Shorten messages, and that drove up the tendency of Clive Palmer voters to, of their own accord, decide that they considered the coalition the lesser of the two evils. On a macro level as well, I would make the point that a lot of the negative advertising against Labor during the campaign didn't come from the coalition, it came from Clive Palmer. That's a magical thing for the coalition, because when you run negative advertising, you are damaging yourself as well as the other party. You're just hoping that you damage them more than you damage yourself. In being negative, you are turning people off you as well as them. You're lowering the tone, hopefully to your own advantage. It's a very fine thing if you are a political party and you've got someone else doing your dirty work for you. All of those anti-Labor messages are out there getting saturation, bombardment coverage in every medium that you care to name, but the person who's copying the opprobrium for going low is not Scott Morrison, it's Clive Palmer. That's a very happy confluence of circumstances for the coalition. That, I think, is the great favour that Clive Palmer did the coalition, not what I consider a rather trivial fact that there was a quote-unquote protest. So that's the big picture in terms of vote shares, but that's not what decides who wins the election. Of course, what decides who wins the election is seats. I think from the taking a step back from everything, the interesting thing is, given that there was a 1.6% two-party preferred swing against Labor, why didn't they lose more seats? You would normally expect with a swing of that kind that there to be a change of hands of about 6 seats. But Labor suffered a net gain of loss of only 1 seat. The coalition, conversely, had a net gain of only 1 seat. And that was a point that Cameron made. Superficially, this looks like a status quo election, but burrow beneath the surface at either the macro or the micro level, there's a lot going on underneath that surface picture of stability. What it's ended up with, though, is a parliament with an extremely similar set of numbers to what we had last time. There was 1 extra seat on this occasion. That was absorbed by an increase in the crossbench from 5 seats to 6. So as far as the major party was concerned, take one out of the Labor column and put one in the coalition and you've got the 2019 result as opposed to the 2016 result. So why didn't Labor lose more seats? Partly because of the effects of redistributions. One of the effects of these redistributions is that we ended up with a parliament of 151 rather than 150. This is because states' seat shares are determined by a formula which involves rounding. Sometimes more states get rounded up and down, so you end up with roughly 150 seats in the House of Representatives. You usually end up with 150, but it can be 1 or 2 in either direction. This time it was 151. New seats were created in Victoria and the Australian Capital Territory. Any new seat in the Australian Capital Territory is a gimme for Labor. 2 Labor seats in Labor seats in the ACT go to 3 Labor seats, so there's a free kick for Labor there. There was another free kick for Labor in Victoria. A new seat was created in Western Melbourne, which is absolute. Labor has a lock on Western Melbourne. Any new seat for Labor, any new seat in Western Melbourne is going to be a free kick for Labor. Conversely, a seat got abolished in South Australia. That was a safe Labor seat, so there's 1 swing to balance the other 2 rounded out, so to speak. The other difference that redistributions made was that the Victorian redistribution turned 2 Liberal seats into notionally Labor seats. Corangamite and Dunkley, Labor won both of them. When I say here that it made the difference in one of those 2 seats, Labor got a 4% swing in Dunkley. That would have been decisive even without the redistribution. But the swing Labor got in Corangamite wouldn't have been decisive without the redistribution. If that had not happened, the Liberals would have held on to Corangamite. But with a little bit of a swing, plus the effect of the redistribution helping Labor in that seat, that was one that got them over the line. So I think I've gotten sort of half of the way to explaining why Labor didn't lose 6 seats despite this 1.6% swing. The other thing that you get is sophomore surge effects, which is an Americanism but a helpful one, whereby if you have a newly elected member of Parliament, and Labor won a lot of new seats in 2016, they didn't win the election but they won a lot of seats that they lost in 2013 and were won back. You have a first-term member of Parliament defending their seat for the first time in 2019. That means that in 2016 you had a Liberal incumbent. The advantage is that an incumbent member has. The Liberals have lost that advantage in these seats now. Labor have gained the advantage. It varies from city to country, but other things being equal, this tends to improve the incumbent party by 1.5 to 2%. Now this meant the difference between Labor victory and defeat, I think, very clearly in 2 seats, one of which was Anne Arlene Cowan. She won a 0.7% winning margin in 2016, so in 2019 we have a Labor member defending Cowan as opposed to a Liberal member defending it. She basically had no swing at all. The margin there is pretty much exactly the same as it was in 2016. I think, though, if she hadn't gotten over the line in 2016 and we still had Luke Simpkins there defending that seat for the Liberal Party, he would have held on to that seat. So, and by the same token, the coalition did well in 2016 to get an absolute majority, even though they got 50.4% of the two-party preferred vote. If you've got a crossbench of 5 members, then you can consider yourself lucky if you end up with a majority with only 50.4% of the two-party preferred vote. But then, as now, what was happening was that in the most decisive, most marginal seats, you had the sophomore surge effect. You had a coalition member defending the most crucial seats in circumstances where it was a Labor member defending them in 2013. So swings and roundabouts, this time the sophomore surge effect is somewhat more favourable towards the Labor because it is Labor who have first-term sitting members defending their seats. I also say here that perhaps also in Lyons. Lyons is one of the 5 seats in Tasmania. Actually, I'll save that one for when I discuss Tasmania again. So, state by state, more or less, there was a tiny, small swing, perhaps about 1%. Again, we've got that thing where we don't actually know what the final two-party swings are because there's a lot of seats where we don't have Labor versus coalition tables. You ended up with a net result, a status quo result in net terms in New South Wales from a small swing to the coalition, so maybe Labor were a bit lucky to get that status quo result. What we have, though, was that Labor lost a seat in Lindsay, which was balanced by a gain in Gilmore. In both cases, I come back to that topic before, that candidate effects can be very decisive when you have these extremely finely tuned electorates. In Lindsay, Labor lost their sitting member, Emma Hussar, under extremely damaging circumstances, and the swing against Labor was particularly bad in Lindsay, even by their very mediocre standards in Western Sydney. In Gilmore, Labor gained a seat in a circumstance where the Liberal member had retired. So the Liberal Party lost their candidate incumbency advantage in Gilmore, and I don't want to speculate into why Labor did as well as they did in Gilmore against the overall trend, but perhaps Warren Mundine was seen as a blow-in. He was the Liberal candidate. Perhaps there was hostility in the local community towards the fact that the existing Liberal candidate had been elbowed aside in favour of Warren Mundine. When you get these, I don't think this looms too largely in the mind of the average voter. The things that do loom large in the mind of the average voter are all the things that Karen was discussing. But when you get down to these absolute line ball seats, these little candidate factors can make enough people feel aggrieved when they make a result. And those were the 2 seats where, against an overall stable trend, the difference went one way or the other. There was effectively no swing in Victoria, which was bitterly disappointing for Labor, coming as it did after the result of the state election in November, when the two-party preferred vote was 57-43. And another point Karen raised is that it can be a very damaging place to be in when everyone thinks that you are the clear favourite to win the election. Maybe if the Victorian election hadn't sent such a clear signal that the Malcolm Turnbull demise was ruinous for the coalition, the campaign and dynamic might have played out differently. But one thing that everybody was expecting was that huge swing to the Labor Party in the state election would have at least some of an echo of the federal election, and it didn't end up happening. Labor did gain 3 seats in Victoria, but one of those was the new seat of Fraser, which, as I said, was effectively a free kick, and the other 2 seats were redistribution influenced as well. As I also said, not decisively in the state country. So while Labor did gain 3 seats in Victoria, they were hoping for an awful lot more than that. Queensland, of course, was the big nightmare for Labor of the election. They lost 2 seats in Queensland, which, you know, for all the hype doesn't seem like all of that much, but in a parliament as finally balanced as this one, you know, any seat that you hold and lose is a bad show. So we've heard that in Townsville and Longman in the northern outskirts of Brisbane both fell, and both of them fell within the context of a statewide swing against Labor of what appears to be about 4%. If that swing had been uniform, Labor would also have lost the seat of Griffith, which is inner southern Brisbane, but as I shall shortly discuss, what we have here is a dynamic that was apparent across the country, where the damage to Labor was done in outer suburbs and the regions, in inner urban areas, not just the trendy inner city, but also in kind of, you know, the affluent posh suburbs across the country. Labor enjoyed swings, and that proved decisive in helping Terry Butler defend her very small margin in Griffith. In Tasmania, to get back to a point that I was going to make, Labor lost Bass and Braddon, the 2 seats in northern Tasmania. This maintained the record of extraordinary volatility in northern Tasmania. Bass in particular has changed hands in 1993, 1996, 1998, 2014, 2007, 2013, 2016, 2019. That's 8 elections out of 10. Bass has changed hands. So maybe we shouldn't have been surprised. Maybe we should just take it to the bank that Bass is going to change hands and chalk that down as a loss. But I hope to determine. So, Labor, as I said, we may have been lucky not to have made it 3. Lyons is central Tasmania. It's a kind of bit of the northern Tasmania, a bit of the south of Tasmania, all of the middle. It's a low-income electorate. It's cut from the same kind of demographic cloth as Bass and Braddon. I think probably the only reason Labor retained Lyons is that the Liberals had to sack their candidate, which turned out to be to the right of even what the Liberal Party wanted to tolerate. And the Liberal Party ended up going into the election saying, vote for the National Party instead, our candidate is rat poison. So, nonetheless, there was a swing to, quote-unquote, the Liberal Party. Labor held on by 2%. Yeah, you know, I think that sophomore surge effect as well. This was a seat Labor won in 2016, just like they won Bass and Braddon in 2016. Sophomore surge effect wasn't enough in Bass and Braddon, it may have been enough in Lyons. I don't want to give Western Australia short shrift, but the fact is that I'm probably running out of time. How much time do I have?
Keep going.
It's very sweet of you. 10 minutes, all right. Western Australia. Well, what happened here? Well, they all happened here, didn't it? No seats changed hands, and no seats changed hands in South Australia. But I'll show you some pretty little maps to sort of... No, I won't do that. But you'll get the impression. South Australia, nothing ever happened in South Australia. South Australia is sadly bereft of marginal seats. If I were the drawers of redistributions in South Australia, I would tweak things around to give South Australia more marginal seats. Then they would not get such short shrift from the government. The government would not say who cares when the car industry in South Australia disappears. They would not show such favouritism towards industries that happen not to be concentrated in South Australia. There's one... The only seat that Labor can theoretically add to its total in South Australia is Boothby. They never quite get there. They didn't quite get there on this occasion either. So a 5-all draw in South Australia seems to be par for the course these days. The ACT, as I said, you had 2 seats in the ACT before you bring out however many, that's as many free seats as Labor gets. Interestingly, Labor held its ground in the Northern Territory. There was a lot of talk in the kind of articles, which I was sort of rolling my eyes at a bit, which I shouldn't have been in hindsight, about the coalition's path to victory. We were led to understand that that path ran through the seat of Solomon, which covers Darwin. And a lot of time was spent in Solomon by both sides. Scott Morrison visited Darwin at least twice during the election campaign. Clearly the coalition had high hopes for Solomon, and I kept hearing that the Territory Labor government of Michael Gunner was terribly unpopular in Northern Territory. I'll have to take their word for it. I don't have the faintest idea what's going on in Northern Territory politics, but apparently there are a lot of reasons for people to be disaffected with Labor in Northern Territory on account of the Territory government. Nonetheless, that was one sort of glimmer of hope Labor had on election night, was as the sort of wave on election night rolls from east to west. You know, we get the early results in, oh dear, Labor aren't doing very well in Queensland, let's hope that the other states save the day. If you were watching that as a Labor partisan, you would have watched with trepidation, waiting for the Northern Territory to come in, hoping that that was okay, and then hoping that Western Australia would somehow save the day. But Northern Territory went off without incident. Labor retained both of those 2 seats. Sadly, for Labor, Western Australia also went off without incident, and that none of the seats Labor was taken in their case. Alright, that is the geographical picture of what happened. Here is my rather amateur attempt to probe into demographics. Now, I should probably apologise for what's known as the ecological fallacy here. I am investigating the demographic characteristics of the areas surrounding individual polling booths here. What I've done here is an analysis to determine the extent to which various demographic indicators help determine the size of, as I have characterised it here, the swing against Labor. Now, you can mislead yourself with this kind of thing, and my favourite example of this is that if you look at the way voting works at aggregate level in the United States, look at the deep red states of the deep south, look at the blue states of California, New York. If you looked at that from a distance, you'd think, oh, well, this is easy. Rich people vote Democrat, poor people vote Republican. The dirt poor areas of the United States are deep red, the wealthiest parts are blue. However, that would completely lead you astray. It is simply not the case. Or just as in Australia, wealthier people vote Conservative parties. So with that qualification added, you need to take a little bit of caution in drawing inferences about the way individuals vote by looking at seat results, booth results, state results, whatever else. Nonetheless, they can help you point in the right direction if you view them judiciously and regard them as to a point at all you should be researching. So what I've done here is try to calculate the extent to which a demographic indicator helps predict the swing against Labor, to Labor actually, in a particular area. So when I say median income at 0.32 with a asterisk against it, an all asterisk, what I mean here is that there was a significant effect whereby the wealthier an area was, the better Labor did in relative terms, in swing terms, in that particular area. So wealthy and better educated areas swung to Labor, lower income and less educated areas swung particularly forcefully to the Coalition. And extrapolate that lesson down the table, the more home ownership, the more people owned their homes, the more greater tendency there was to swing to Labor. Not to vote Labor in absolute terms, but for Labor to have done better than they did in 2016. The other interesting thing, well, there's a number of interesting things, and the other thing I should explain here is that all of these effects are independent of each other. It's not just the case that people who own homes tend to be wealthy. These impacts are being measured independently of each other. If an area was wealthy and especially concentrated in people owning their homes rather than paying off their mortgages, then Labor did especially well in that area. You have to add all of these effects together to get a picture of what was going on in a particular area. Now, the thing that's most interesting to me, in fact, because I wrote an article about it the other day, is that secular/no religion. There seems to have been a social conservative backlash going on against Labor at this election, which proved to be more forceful than Labor realised. So many of you out there no doubt mocked Scott Morrison when he started speaking in tongues at that kind of Pentecostal church service, but I suspect that hit the mark. And I suspect when, a few days before the election, Bill Shorten attacked Scott Morrison for not coming out and saying that gay people wouldn't go to hell, I think that was a mistake. I think he should have downplayed the issue altogether rather than draw people's attention to the fact that Scott Morrison is a religious person and Bill Shorten is not. Because if you do read the article that I had in Crikey which explored this, the religious vote is more variable than the non-religious vote. More people on the non-religious people are more left-leaning, more Labor and Greens voting, but they are more stable in their voting patterns. People who are religious tend to be more up for grabs. And I calculated that based on survey research between the 2013 and 2016 elections, there was no change in the vote among people who were not religious. Among people who were religious, there was a 7% swing from the coalition to Labor. People who were 2013 to 2016, remember I'm not talking about the current election. People who were on side with Tony Abbott because they recognised him as a religious person, a lot of them were alienated by Malcolm Turnbull, and the coalition lost a lot of votes that way. So this shows up in what I've done here, my secular/no religion thing. Areas that were more religious swung especially heavily against Labor. Now, the rest of it is all to do with employment, and the trend that emerges there is that you get negative numbers for people who are in kind of blue-collar occupations and positive ones for people who are in professional/technical occupations. That, I think, has been explored pretty well by Karen already. Add all this together and what we end up with is good results, relatively good results for Labor in inner urban areas, bad results for Labor in outer suburban and regional areas. The other point that I've made here is that Labor did badly in the Chinese communities of Sydney and Melbourne. And I'd go into that if I had time, but I think I'm probably stretching it as a little bit as it is. But nonetheless, 3 seats that Labor really would have been very optimistic about this time 6 months ago. Reid, Banks and Chisholm, the first 2 in Sydney, the third one in Melbourne. Both of these are real hubs of the Chinese community, and for reasons which let's not get bogged down, but for one reason or another, the Chinese community really did swing quite forcefully to the Liberal Party on this occasion. The final point that I make on this slide is that many of these swings are a case of reversing what happened in 2016. This is the thing you always need to bear in mind when you're looking at swings. It's too easy to look at them and say that this is all about what happened at this election. Very often what they tell you about is what happened last time. And what happened last time was that effect that I explored, that Malcolm Turnbull alienated a lot of social conservative sentiment, and a lot of socially conservative people who will vote Labor for economic reasons did vote Labor in 2016. In 2019, Scott Morrison seems to be successful in bringing them back on board. Now, here we have some, I don't know how clear this is, but I hope it is. On the left we've got Sydney, on the right we've got Brisbane. I could have used any of the 5 capital cities, the mainland capital cities, to make this point, but these are the 2 where I think it came through clearest and most interestingly, where the pattern of swings was that I kept referring to. In the inner city of Sydney, you've got strong swings to Labor. On the North Shore of Sydney, you've got swings to Labor. Not enough to get Labor within cooey of winning any of these seats in the North Shore, and this was a pattern in Labor as well. Labor got good swings in seats like Higgins and Goldstein, and that's nice, but they're never going to win those seats. So Labor were punching into thin air where the swing was accumulating towards them. The rest of Sydney, though, swung surprisingly heavily to the Liberals. And the swing starts not far to the south of central Sydney. And here's where you start to hit these Chinese areas that I was talking about. Look southwest of central Sydney and you will see the electorate of Banks where David Coleman, the Liberal Party member, had an exceptionally good result, and that Chinese community sentiment really kicked in there. As well as that in Western Sydney. Now Western Sydney is a more diverse environment than a lot of people give it credit for. It has white areas, it has ethnic areas. Both of them swung heavily towards the Liberal Party. Not decisively in the case of the seats which had high Lebanese and Vietnamese populations, but nonetheless, all of these sorts of areas swing heavily to the Liberal Party. And the narrative that ties that together is that kind of social conservative backlash that I was referring to. And in Sydney especially, this map resembles the same-sex marriage referendum results. The electorates of Western Sydney were the only ones in Australia, apart from a few seats in rural Queensland, where no majorities were recorded in the same-sex marriage survey. So clearly that's a good pointer towards social conservative sentiment, and there seemed to be a lot of that going on in this election. In Brisbane, I made the point before that Terry Butler did very well to hold her seat of Griffith. Griffith is the sort of southern part of the inner city, and there you see a little island of redness. in the middle of Brisbane. This is a national effect where inner urban areas do well for Labor. So she was defending a margin of 1 to 2%. She successfully defended that. Move away from that area of inner Brisbane and the entirety of Queensland is an absolute car crash for Labor. They lose the seat of Longman in northern Brisbane, and it was even worse, obviously, in central Queensland. That's something I probably could have and should have gone into in greater detail, that those sorts of mining seats of central Queensland. And another interesting result was Hunter in New South Wales. I think I will end on this point. Hunter is a seat that Labor never loses. They didn't lose it on this occasion either. But One Nation got over 20% of the vote in Hunter. It's a coal mining electorate. We do not, this is the one, there are two interesting, if you're following election results, which most people stopped doing 2 weeks ago, but if you're a junkie and you can't get enough of following election results, there are two interesting things that we're still waiting on. Hunter, did One Nation end up overtaking the coalition in that seat? It's touch and go whether or not the final count after the exclusion of all the other preferences in Hunter is going to be Labor versus Nationals like it usually is, or Labor versus One Nation. If One Nation get ahead of the Nationals in the preference count and the final vote is Labor versus One Nation, Labor's winning margin in that seat will be about 2%. It will be as close as One Nation has come to winning a seat in the House of Representatives since Pauline Hanson won Oxley in 1996. So that will be a fascinating thing to keep. I'll save the think pieces to others, but we're talking about a coal mining electorate here, and obviously that speaks volumes. And it resonates with the same things that drove those double-digit swings against Labor in central Queensland, even in a seat like Dawson where, what's his name? No. Christensen. George Christensen stuck a giant "Don't Vote Me" sign on his back and nonetheless got a double-digit swing in his favour. That I will leave for questions if anyone wants to ask them, but I think that probably takes care of my half an hour in a reasonably smooth fashion. So thank you very much.